Haunted Chronicles. We have two guests tonight that I said they have way too much information to share with us, and we needed a 2-hour special extravaganza. So we're doing 2 hours tonight, guys. I wanted to put you two guys on together because every time I talk to Bill, Paul usually come up. And how did you guys meet?
Well, one of God's little jests, I think. But actually, no. Bill contacted me, and he can tell you more about how this happened in reference to the Bridgeport book, The World's Most Haunted House, because I was one of the few surviving eyewitnesses to that, and we became great friends immediately, and. We don't live near each other. We're both in New England, but, we're good 2 hours apart. But, we get together as often as we can. We often speak at the same events, such as the Exeter UFO conference, things of this kind. And we have just a wonderful time. He's just a great, great fellow.
Well, Exeter.
Oh, thank you, Paul.
Forget I said that.
Yeah, Paul was on my list of witnesses to call. And I talked to Paul, and he really struck me as somebody who was, sounded very intelligent. Of course, I guess the bar is pretty when you're talking to me, but sounded very intelligent. Yeah, it made a lot of sense, and I had the first person I spoke to was retired police officer Joseph Smick, who was quite a bit older, retired and living in Florida, and then. I think Paul was 2 or 3 on my list of, people that I contacted, and he had, quite a story to tell, and then it fleshed out from there. So that's how I initially met Paul, and like Paul said, expanded from there, and we kept in touch.
And for those who aren't familiar with the Lindley Street haunting, Paul, can you tell us how that evolved, that you got involved with that case?
Well, I think it was sort of one of those, how the most dramatic events in life can start with dumb luck, pretty much. And since 1972, I'd been involved with Ed and Lorraine Warren. And in 71 and 72, I was working on my first case, which was it was in Connecticut, but it was nowhere near Bridgeport. And I'd written something about that and some theories I had about it. And Lorraine Warren read it and thought it was kind of cool, and she called me, and I went down, and we became friends pretty quickly, and especially because Lorraine was a fantastic cook, and you never wanted to miss a meal cooked by Lorraine Warren. So that's how it started, 1974, and of course I was in the seminary at the time, and I was home from the seminary in Ogdensburg, New York, where I was studying philosophy, and I got home I lived in Connecticut also, about 60 miles from where they lived. And they said, come on down, have dinner. It was Sunday, the 24th of November, the week before Thanksgiving. And so I headed down. I'm sorry?
I said coincidence?
Well, I don't know if there is any such thing.
It's the week before Thanksgiving.
Because I had a flat tire on the way down. And had it not been for that flat tire, I might have missed the whole thing. So I changed the tire and pulled up to the Warrens' rather lovely wooded area, the land and the home. And the first thing I know, Lorraine comes leaping out the door and says, "Are you in a high spiritual state right now?" And of course, there was kind of an uh-oh moment, because I kind of wasn't. So, in the long story short, I never got my dinner, and down we went. I went with Ed and Ed Warren down to this house about 10 miles from where they lived in Monroe, Connecticut, to Lindley Street, 966 Lindley Street in Bridgeport. Ed came down later with Father Bill Charbonneau, a priest of the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Hartford, which is where I was from, and that's how I got involved.
Wow. So what did you walk into there? What was your how were the series of events? How did it what happened?
The police were already there. Now that morning, and Bill can fill you on this all in his book, there had been some pound, and this has been going on for a long time, pounding on the walls and a lot of strange things, but it really, really had picked up the previous night of the 23rd. And the family had gone to New York the previous morning, Saturday, and they'd come back to find some things out of place, a television on the bed and all this business in Marcy's room, the little girl. There had been an incident with knives flying around the kitchen, things of this kind, and it really got worse. So they called, things were flying off the wall, religious pictures, things of this kind, and so they called a friend of theirs, John Holsworth, who was an off-duty Bridgeport police officer, and he came over and didn't know what to do, called in his on-duty colleagues, and they witnessed a number of things, and Bill reproduces in his very good book some of the police reports that were filed by the officers. I remember, now by the time I got there were officers there. When I went down to Ed Warren asked me to keep an eye on Marcy to make sure she wasn't doing any of these things. Father, there was a priest had come and blessed the house that morning. Father Bill Charbonneau later did the same thing. Now, this was not an exorcism; it was just a blessing, and things kind of calmed down. I find in these cases that when you go into a house and you're fresh off the street, usually, not always, almost always, I found that it kind of creates a new kind of chemical mix, and it kind of calms down for a while. So the first thing I actually witnessed, because the place was a mess, there was a baby carriage that belonged to Marcy, and the thing, as Mr. Gooden, called the gentleman of the house, was taking stuff out of drawers and throwing it into this baby carriage and wheeling it around the house. All right, that is a story I heard. Shortly after the Warrens and I arrived, the lady of the house arrived, Mrs. Gooden, Laura Gooden. She's coming back for the emergency room at St. Vincent's Hospital with a broken toe that had been caused by a flying television set. So she kind of grabbed me and said, "Have you seen anything like this before in your life?" And I, well, no, not yet. And sure enough, here it was. So the first thing that I remember happening was we were in the living room, and there was a huge crash in the little girl's bedroom. Now you can't overemphasize how tiny this house was. Really, it was a little 3-room bungalow kind of thing you'd have like as a summer cottage or summer camp or something, in some resort area. But we went, and sure enough, the chest of drawers from one side of her room had gone to the other, and it was smashed against the wall. This is the sort of thing that happened frequently. Among the most dramatic things that happened to me were, I think probably one of the most interesting was Monday night. The Warrens had left, and I was in the house. And the thing is, there were police and firefighters and reporters in this house like all the time. So actually on Sunday, before the end of Sunday, was an interesting moment for me. There were Bridgeport police and firefighters, 3 of them on one side of me and 3 of them on the other, and the refrigerator in the kitchen picked itself up completely silently, floated, and then put itself back down again, But probably the most dramatic thing that happened to me was the following night, on Monday night, and the Warrens, as I say, had left to go do some TV interview or radio interview, and I was in the house with the Gooden family, which, as I say, consisted of Laura and Jerry and the little girl Marcy. There was a neighbor, and there was John Sopko from the Bridgeport Post. There might have been some other, I think her babysitter too, but there was a couple of people. We were all in this small living room. All of a sudden, there was this you could feel this energy kind of building up. And I had been playing a game with the girl. For some reason, she liked Monopoly, which was kind of complicated. And then we felt this energy kind of building up. Jerry went into the kitchen. He says, "It's going to start again." So he all of a sudden begins chanting in this beautiful bass voice, what sounded to me like Latin from the funeral mass. And of course, it had been 10 years since there had been Latin in the mass. So I'm trying to figure that out when this energy gets stronger and stronger. And I can only describe them as 4 things. And I had all along the impression, and I because of my seminary education, I assumed these were demons and spirits and all this business, as theologically they would be, and the Warrens believe the same thing. But I had the impression there were 4 of these things in this house, coming and going. And there were, you could almost see these gauzy figures. Kind of, the whole kitchen was full of it. He's in there chanting. 4 of these things come down the hallway. One of them stood in front of me, and I put the little girl behind me because I knew it was after her. And it took me a long time to write about this or talk about it because it was so bizarre that I had no frame of reference for it with the paradigm that I was operating on at the time.
And-
I just instinctively pushed against it. It pushed back, physically pushed back. I could feel what I really believe was a skeletal structure, like an anatomy, like it was a material being. And it got around me and through the girl, and I made the mistake. And this is how I learned the hard way: you don't get angry, or fearful, or annoyed, or anything else in the presence of these things because it makes them stronger. They feed on it. They're parasites. This thing got so strong that I pulled the family out of the house. Fortunately, the cops had cordoned off the street. There had been a couple of thousand people outside this house, so we did not walk out in the middle of a crowd. So then this is the days long before cell phones, so I had to go to a neighbor's house to use the telephone to call the Warrens. And something seemed to follow me, and the kid said the priest wants to use the phone. They were mixing me up with Father Charbonneau, expecting one of us to come flying out the window like the priest did in the Exorcist movie, which had been released the previous December, and all this. So it took them an hour to get back into the city from 10 miles away because of the traffic created by this. And that's probably the most dramatic of several dramatic moments that occurred to me that happened to me in that house. I don't want to monopolize the conversation.
No, that's actually that's amazing.
Well, the interesting thing about the case is, I think when I found Boyce Beatty, that really that really blew the lid off the case, because Boyce had 30 hours of, to think about it, it's just an incredible amount of enters. 30 hours of enters. There was 22 cassette tapes filled up on both sides. Then he had a reel-to-reel, had 8 hours of interviews with Bridgeport police officers that were all done at the Bridgeport Police Department in a special conference room that was set up, and they were mandated to be interviewed. It wasn't like a choice thing. Would you mind being? No, the police said no. You will be interviewed to help with this, and that was done after it was announced a hoax. And that's what really intrigued me. Is I'm like, wait a minute, okay, so you announced it's a hoax, and now you set up mandatory interviews, and now you have a reel-to-reel of 8 hours of these interviews. Mm-hmm. So it was a total of 30 hours, and then when I did another 10 hours myself, so it was 40 hours of interviews and close to 70 witnesses. And the story just never ended. You kept running into people who were connected. I mean, I did a lecture with Boyce, and we ended up running into Father Doyle's sister. Father Doyle was, he ended up going there when the fire department called him. He was the fire department chaplain, because it was this, as Paul described, this kind of chain of not knowing what to do. Holsworth gets there and says everything's moving around. The family's on the porch and says, I don't know what to do. So he calls for backup. Police get there. They're like, we don't know what to do. They call the fire department. Fire department gets there. 13 firemen, 2 chiefs, in 3 trucks. They're like, well, we don't know what to do.
What are they going to do?
So one of them
my God.
Yes. Well, they were checked for dust on windowsills to see if there's any movement of the house, or they'd pull in at saws. What do you do? And as one of the quotes went, we at the fire department are very good at ghost chasing and chasing devils, and they didn't want to stay there a little bit. They're like, well, what are we gonna do? So and one of them ended up calling Father Doyle, and his words were, Father, I haven't been drinking, but this is what's been happening here. And so Father Doyle's sister, who we were able to do an on the spot interview with her. So just as a kind of setting it up, that's what really fascinated with me about this case. There's so many of them, and of course Paul being more experienced, you may be able to tell, well, all right, I didn't need that level of proof or whatever. But, when you're coming from the outside and you really you don't know anything about the case, to have that kind of information, not just from a proof point of view, but even just to kind of understand what the heck happened there. Because like anything else, there were a lot of urban legends around the case, and it was written about very briefly in many books, except Paul's book, I hope I get it right, Faces in the Window, right? Yeah.
Well, Faces at the Window.
That was
Faces in the Window was a novel. You get me into a giant lawsuit.
Yeah.
That's just a joke.
Yeah. Yeah, right. But that was the most anybody wrote about it. Nobody really knew what happened. Nobody had the whole story, and even Boyce didn't have the whole story. He had a lot of the story, but he didn't even have the whole story. And I didn't either until I, went and did the interviews and put it all together. And, again, I owe a great many people, for having that all together. But so there was just, it was very interesting to have that much detail about what happened, and from so many different perspectives, because things were happening in all of the rooms at once. And I think that was one of the things that stood out for Joe Tomek, is he was very skeptical. And for about 15, 20 minutes when he was there, he kept questioning, come on, are they trying to recreate The Exorcist here, or what's going on? And in fact, he was having a meeting in the kitchen, for example, with the three other officers were there. And he's like, come on, guys, what do you think's really going on here? You really think is this a crock of crap or what? And as he's saying this, the guys are pointing at him because behind his back, the refrigerator's floating.
Yeah.
And he's, so he turned around and just saw it come down. He's like, all right, well, I guess that answers that, So just very, very interesting from that point of view, because it wasn't like you had one or two witnesses, or you couldn't say, well, maybe somebody misinterpreted something, or maybe somebody imagined something, or, you hear all kind of stuff. Maybe they didn't know what they saw, or, this you have just numerous people seeing the same thing or different things at the same time in different rooms. And, one of the interesting things that happened, Father Doyle, when he arrived, he got his, the little kits they used to carry with holy water and everything. He got his little kit out and put all the things on the table. He was going to do a blessing. And Officer Tomek was right near him, and Father went to reach for the holy water, and it fell down and rolled off the table. So he went, picked it up, put it back, and was getting ready for his thing to grab it again, and it fell over and went down. And Joe's looking like, what the hell? And it happened 3 times, and finally Father said, well, I better not push it, and puts everything away. But the other Joe Tomek story, which I thought was really neat. They were all leaving. The police were leaving by this time. Things had kind of quieted down, and they had to go. And Joe stayed behind and said, I'll be right there, guys, because he wanted to try to kind of catch people without being observed. So he went in there, and the Warrens, I think, were in the kitchen, whatever. He kind of just wanted to peek around. And he went into Marcy's room, and he said to himself, not out loud, but he said, if you can hear me, I want you to do something, now. And right when he sat, a picture fell off the wall, and was shaking actually. And then he said, okay, you can stop now. This is he's saying it to himself, and it stopped. And he said at that moment he knew that this was real. And even today, he says, I think 97, 98%, he says, I'm positive it's real. I still leave a few percent because it just shake his head. It's how do you comprehend or understand or, interpret that? But there was a big variety of, a very large variety of things happened. One of the weirdest ones was when the family came, and this was after it was announced a hoax. This was in December at Christmas time, when Jerry actually put the tree in a bucket of cement and they wired it to the wall. Because everything was falling over, and so he's like, that's it. He went to the hardware store, and he was putting wires around everything, furniture and whatnot. And but they went out for a while, and they came back, and Jerry had a habit of going in the house first to kind of check things out for the family before they came in. And he went in there, and all the ornaments from the tree were not on the tree anymore. They were all in a pile. So that was creepy. And so there were things like that. I guess more like taunting kind of arrangements or things, if you will, that happened were the things that really struck me. And that was one of them. There was the desk had this like plastic coating that was like riveted in. For probably for some of us older folks who might remember what I'm talking about. But that ended up being bent up. So there were some really weird. It wasn't just things falling over. I mean, some of the things that happened to the shelves and stuff were they were like bent, just really strange. The coats floating, Marcy, of course, being picked up, thrown across the room, her rising in a chair, doing a somersault. And actually, it was one or two skeptics said, well, Marcy was just playing and did it herself. And when you listen to the interviews, like, oh, well, Marcy used her feet and pushed back. But then when you listen to the witnesses, the people who were actually there, like one of the firemen said, well, but her feet weren't on the ground. She was sitting with her legs crossed underneath underneath herself. And then they're like, well, where were her arms? Oh, no, her arms weren't on the chair then. They were on her lap. So when you really looked at the details never supported any explanation that anyone was able to give. It was really, I mean, you can guess, but then that's all they are. But when you really got down to the details, it was fascinating to hear. Also, the level of the way people observed things there. And you'd listen to 6 interviews, and 3 didn't see it from the beginning, right? So if that's all you had, you'd say, all right, well, we don't really know as much about that. And then you'd hear the other 3 witnesses, and they did see it from the beginning. So that's what was so fascinating about this case, is you had a lot of detail about individual incidents that you ordinarily don't have. I mean, like the TV that fell and gashed Paul's leg. You not only had Paul to tell the story, you had everybody in the room telling the story, and from the way they saw it, and from the the different perspectives. And so, if one person said, "Well, no, I really didn't see if there was anyone else close by, where they could have done it, or whatever," but then you'd have somebody else, "Oh no, nobody was there," So, lots of things happened, and just really great detail on it. But I think, Paul was there definitely for some of the craziest parts. I mean, the pushing your pushing your hand into an entity, I think, is about as crazy as you can get.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah,
but,
really.
But yeah, I mean, a lot of things went on there, and it wasn't constant, of course. These things often were, but the banging sounds are very very interesting. And the lieutenant at the time backed up the family, saying, no, this isn't the first time they called. They didn't just call after The Exorcist came out, or they didn't just call in November. They called 2 years ago, about these noises, and but nobody could know what was done. So when when you hear about what happened and what the family did, and detail by detail, it was very interesting. Laura was a weird, very neurotic, and definitely an unhealthy parenting style. So when you look at poltergeist cases and that kind of dysfunction going on, I mean, they had I think Paul, you probably remember, I think you said they had enough going on without poltergeist. So definitely
it was not a healthy situation. Well, Marcy was adopted by this family, and Bill can fill you in on this too. They had a young boy, natural birth, who had passed away. And of course, everybody says right away, "Aha! Must have been the jealous ghost of this." Give me a break. So the little girl was adopted, Canadian Indian girl who was 10 years old, and the Goodens themselves were in their 40s, late 40s, I believe. Bill, but
when this, when the height of it happened, they were, I think, 50 and 50. They were in their early.
Oh, okay, 50s. There you go. I didn't ask them their ages, but
well,
there
when
was
when they adopted her, you're right. They were in their 40s when they adopted her, because they had Marcy when she was 4.5. Then they got her.
But super protective. I mean, you can understand that, having lost a child. She'd been home for weeks in this tiny house. It's got poltergeist bait written all over it, or parasite bait. But I did want to point out one really ultra strange thing that happened on Sunday night, about 9:00 of the 24th. We were in the kitchen, and I was sitting at the little kitchen table. Lorraine Warren was just across from me. Ed was there. There was a police officer, and of course the Goodens. And all of a sudden, Lorraine kind of let out a yelp, and I watched as a second-degree burn blister formed on between her thumb and forefinger of her right hand, and there was nothing to create such a burn. No one was smoking. Nobody had spilled anything hot. And the first thing Ed said,
sorry about that.
Oh, okay.
I was attempting.
Okay, you're kind of fading in and out there, but I'm sorry, I'm used to being the show host. But in any case, there was Ed Warren said immediately, "Lorraine, I want you out of this house because spontaneous human combustion could take place here." Now, Bill might have some pungent comments on that subject, but Lorraine refused to leave, and Ed described her as a, quote, light trance medium, unquote. So presumably there would have been some, whatever that may mean, there would have been some sensitivity to this, but it was one of the weirdest things I ever saw. And, we did a little first aid, but, it just appear. I watched it appear on her hand for no apparent reason.
Yeah, that's... No, I was just going to say what's really cool about that is that moment Paul was talking about. I have that.
Yeah, that's on tape.
That happening. I have the audio of that happening.
With my youthful voice saying, a blister is forming.
Right, yeah. No, but I mean, I have the conversation. That whole thing was on tape because the only reason it was recorded is Ed was getting ready to interview.
For the radio station.
He was getting ready. Yeah, he was getting ready to interview somebody, and so he had the audio running, and that's what happened. So that was really neat to have that snippet. Now, I have, I know the police officer was, I believe, a little questioning about that. So I don't know. I mean, Paul, if you saw it, I believe it. My only thing with, with I don't want to speak bad about the Warrens, but definitely there's some sketchy validity to some of the things they had. But I mean, there's a popular magic trick where you can make a burn form on your finger, and it's very easy to do, and it goes back many, many years. So, when I heard the blister forming type of story, I mean, it's an age-old trick. So I'm not saying that's what it was, but just that happening that didn't impress me that much.
Yeah, maybe it was not what it appeared to be.
Again, and I don't know. I'm not saying that's what it was, but I try to look at everything. I mean,
sure.
I haven't heard. I must say that I did hear the. I think Jimmy, you had it. I did hear the Warrens lecture on Lindley Street, and they didn't say anything that was, that was all the story. They did a good job explaining it, but the bliss on the finger trick is somewhat of a carnival staple, so I was a little suspicious of that. But I mean, and that's something Paul could have saw happen before his eyes. And matter of fact, there's another popular magic trick where you take your fingernail and you twist your fingernail and make it go on the other side of your finger. And I actually used to, people used to gasp. I used to actually be scared to perform it because it was so stupid. I couldn't understand why anybody would fall for it, but people would actually get frightened. It was, the illusion was strong, but once you knew the secret, you're like, "Are you kidding? No one's going to believe it." I don't know. That's
Is it more effective than the "I got your nose" trick?
A little.
I want to know about Marcy. What was Marcy like as a child?
Well, I knew her just briefly there, and then I'll let Bill take it because he's done a lot of research. I remember her as a very pretty 10-year-old black-haired little kid. The first time I met her, it was in the basement of that little house, and there were two huge cops standing over her, saying, "Oh, you're doing this, aren't you?" So that was even suggested as early as the 24th, if not sooner. And she was holding her cat, Sam, who reputedly could talk.
We still haven't even got to Sam yet.
No, I didn't believe that for a minute, but I will never, especially having gone into journalism after they threw me out of the seminary for doing this stuff. I could never get over the sight of network reporters from CBS, ABC, and NBC standing around the cat, holding microphones, begging it to say something. So I even went into journalism after that. So that was really, really pretty strange. But she was a very, I thought, kind of a very introverted child. As I say, had been stuck in that house for a very long, for weeks after having been bullied in school, as we would say today. And she seemed a little bit devious to me, but I never caught her, and I watched her like a hawk. I never caught her doing any of this stuff. Yeah. So Bill can explain further from his research.
Yeah. I mean, everyone did describe her being, quiet. The police officers really said she was, pretty much acting what they would describe as just, pretty normal. One of the biggest rumors from the house about, Marcy being psychic was one police officer setting up another police officer for a joke by telling Marcy, the brother's name, and hey, when he comes back, go ahead and do that, and tell him, the cat, could guess the name, and so they played a little joke. And I remember listening to the police officer interview. Voice goes, so what did the officer say when you told him what you did? He said, and the guy, you hear the officer laughing. He goes, "We never told him." So the officer was out there probably telling that story for years, and that was a big story. So that started the Marcy psychic rumor, which was just a joke.
Should we tell him about the book, Bill?
We told the same thing with the book. Paul had left a prayer book there, and they and one of the newspaper guys, I guess nobody was giving him enough of a story, and he gets thrown out. So he ends up saying, "Oh, well, this is an occult book," and later on, the police took that story and said Marcy's always carrying around these occult books, And
Well, it was
of
a
course, they didn't
Russian
have
Orthodox
email.
prayer book with a funny looking cross on it, and the Slavonic language and a Cyrillic alphabet on one page and English on the other. So naturally, they're not going to know what it is. And so the urban legend kind of got started that Marcy was into the occult, was carrying around a book written in Sanskrit, if you don't mind. But that's
Right.
baloney. The book belonged to me.
Oh my
Picture of
God.
it in Bill's book.
Yeah, yeah. And the parents are so strict. I mean, I could just they would never let her have anything like that. I mean, there's probably a whole bunch of stuff she wouldn't be
Well, and
allowed
she
to
was
have. Like
10, and she was 10, right? She was
and she
10
was
years old. I
10,
mean,
yeah, yeah,
why would she have a?
and then,
Oh,
Well, she demonstrated,
yeah,
Jennifer, actually a trait that we've seen in a lot of cases, and that's that she enjoyed the attention, particularly an introverted child who was just smothered with parental. Well, I'll just be nice and call it
oh,
guardianship,
and
right.
and she thought it was great. All these people in the house, cops, reporters,
Yes. She was
and
being social. People were paying attention to her.
yeah, paying
Right.
attention. And I find that that's very often the case. People enjoy this attention that can come from this sometimes.
Yeah.
So that was Marcy.
and they know when, and they know when the phenomena stops and things quiet down, then everybody leaves. So that's when you get some of these people, some of the kids, trying to contribute or fake things or get things started again, and that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people seen pictures of Marcy and said, "Oh, something with her eyes," or I think she, they think she had something demonic in her, or that kind of thing, or she was communicating with her grandfather on the reservation, and it was an evil plot, or you hear a lot of that stuff. But I think she was just an ordinary 10-year-old girl. And
some of the
very
theories are
introverted.
weirder than what actually
when I
happened.
say ordinary, yeah, I mean, when I say ordinary, I mean, she was very introverted. And when you're introverted, that's when you get picked on. And, she didn't look like everybody else in that neighborhood because she was Native American. So yeah, she got picked on. She was very quiet. But people that knew her said she was a sweet little girl, especially people who knew her later when she ended up going to, not the public school, when she ended up going to the St. Patrick's. Matter of fact, some of my friends, some of the people that I later went to high school with, knew her and said, "Oh, she's a sweet little girl," and or I was friends with her or whatever. So and I know Joe Tomek was, and a few of the police officers commented they thought, and one of the firemen too, they thought that she should have been more afraid for what happened. Some of the stuff didn't seem to faze her, but that's a weird thing, right? I mean, we often project how we think other people should feel when things
Especially when
happen,
you're a cop and you're more afraid than the kid is.
Right. Right.
Right.
With all due
I was
respect.
just going to say, Paul, I mean, how often, I mean, a lot of times we think the children are going to be ones that are, scared out of their minds and, what could be more like us. So, yeah, so you don't really, it's a hard one. Again, it's just for taking guesses because they're asked the question and trying to, put everything together and look at it. But, I think that's it. It's quiet and introverted, and like Paul said, enjoying the comedy, which is natural. And Tudor even said, when you're sitting on police officer's lap all day, and they're paying attention to her and playing games with her and stuff.
Right.
I mean,
It was
she
probably
didn't have
as
that
close to
much
normal, with her overprotective parents. It was probably a breath of fresh air,
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Especially when you're playing Monopoly by yourself all the time. I mean, come on,
Right.
So.
Right.
Was there a resolution? Did the activity stop? Did they move? What happened at the end there?
Well, Bill can fill you in too, but I don't know. For what happened on Tuesday afternoon was that the Warrens had left to go do some TV thing. I had to go home just to take a shower, maybe get something to eat, and I promised Mrs. Gooden, who made me promise to come back. And Marcy hugged me and made me promise to come back. And I said we'd meet the Warrens back at their house at 2:00 in the afternoon. So I showed up at 2:00, but on the way home, I'd heard on one of the New York CBS stations that the police had declared that the thing was a hoax caused by the kid. I said, what? What did I miss here? So I get back there at 2:00 in the afternoon, and Mrs. Gooden, who several hours before had made me promise to go back, takes one look at me and tells the cop to throw me off her property.
Oh.
So I said, what the heck? So I kind of put my tail between my legs and went up to the Warrens' house where they had gathered. And again, it wasn't, nobody had cell phones. You couldn't communicate. So you just sort of showed up.
Right.
So we spent the better part of the next 2 days at the Warrens' house. Reporters were calling from as far away as Australia. And it was just awful. So Ed and I went on the radio. I think it was WNAB in Bridgeport. And we kind of dueled with the police on this for a few days after that, and then I, had to go home for Thanksgiving. That was the end of that for me. Later on, we heard that Marcy had been taken to the Fairfield Hills State Hospital, which mercifully is now closed, psychiatric place, and things that happened there. I mean, I don't know. It was all rumor from there on in, but Bill has researched this more than I have, and Boyce Beatty as well.
Yeah, I mean, the activity was going on, although it was towards the end of December, beginning of January, it was much calmer. And what happened was Father Doyle, he was pastor for St. Patrick's School, and he went and talked to the school and said, look, I was at the house. This stuff was real. This child has been through a lot. She was beat up at the public school. She can't go back there. The parents can't afford to send her to St. Patrick's School. We need to give them a break and make it affordable so that they can get Marcy in there. And that's what they did. Father Doyle talked and made that happen. And the school agreed to it. And so, therefore, they were able to afford to send Marcy there. And once Marcy got to St. Patrick's, it was much, nicer, friendly environment rather than the inner city public school, which was rough school. And so, Marcy was happy. She wasn't stuck in the house anymore. Teachers were friendly, children were friendly. She was starting to make friends, and that's when it just kind of petered out from there because, as Paul has said many times, when you break that kind of way of thinking and that dysfunction and or as you call it, Paul, the Peter Pan theory, think happy thoughts, now that she's not in that same kind of state and sending out that kind of frequency, the phenomena stopped. And of course, the family did want to sell the house, not as much as they were scared to live there. It was just, you can't really live or work in the city anymore. I mean, it was horrible. I mean, Jerry was picked on at work, and they pulled clothes off the line at home and flattened the tires, and it was really sad. Yeah, the family was attacked pretty badly, and they couldn't sell the house, and mostly because not just because of the haunting of what happened there. I'm sure that could have been part of it, but also because price wise, and you look at the house, it's 768 square feet. I mean, who's going to want to buy it for the price that they needed to get it for? So they ended up having to, Jerry painted it, got rid of the swans that moved by themselves outside of the house, and the minute he painted it, it was another newspaper story. Look, they painted the haunted house, so no matter what they tried to do, it was difficult. But anyhow, the phenomena did end in January. And from then on in, the Goodins went on the radio, went on WNAB radio once, just to say, number one, it was real. Number two, we're not crazy. Number three, Marcy didn't do it. And so they went on the radio once and then never spoke about it again for the rest of their lives. They wouldn't do any interviews or anything on it.
So last little question I have. What do you think happened, Paul, from the time you left, you were begged to come back, and the time you came back?
Is Paul there?
Is Paul there? Oh.
Might have dropped Paul.
Uh-oh.
Oh, no, my mic was
Oh, okay.
muted. I'm
Oh.
sorry.
Oh, there you go, honey.
Sorry about that. Okay, well, to answer your question, Jennifer,
Yeah.
between the time I left, Superintendent Walsh of the police department came in, Bridgeport Police came in. I don't think he came to the house personally. Maybe Bill knows. But the orders came down. This stops now. The kid did it. It's difficult to exaggerate how tied up the city was. And Bridgeport is not a small town. And people were coming in from every which way to try and see this house, curiosity seekers and this sort of thing. So, and apparently he read the riot act of the good and said that this has to stop. And, of course, that means that the Warrens and I were out, and Father Charbonneau as well, because we'd been standing around for the better part of 3 days waiting for the Diocese of Bridgeport, Catholic Diocese of Bridgeport, the bishop particularly, to give permission to do an exorcism. All right. So that never happened as far as I know. And that's what happened as far as how we got thrown out of this.
Wow.
Yeah, well, the superintendent, he never stepped foot in the house, but he did, like Paul said, it was, the assignment was passed down saying, this, you got to close this up. You got to close it up and get out of there. I mean, people even tried to burn the house down. So while the family was in it, it was a small fire and, was found and they were arrested and there was a police there. So, but I mean, it was getting to a point where they had to do something. And the part about Paul being kicked out, not Paul personally, but the war and everything.
Right.
A lot of that
seemed pretty personal to me when the cop did it.
Mm.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of that stemmed from what Marcy said about the Warrens. Marcy said Lorraine held her finger under hot water to make it look burnt. And they were discovering that Ed made long distance telephone calls from the house to Quinn Media from New York, and and they weren't rich people, as you can tell, living in a tiny little house. So so they're getting news of that, and finally they said, "That's it. I don't want the Warrens or anybody with them coming in the house again." So it wasn't just it was. Like many things in life, it wasn't a very simple answer. There's a few things going on at once.
Right.
The need to close up the story, things that Marcy was saying when she was being interviewed, and the family just completely discussed it. They caught Marcy kicking the TV when she was on the floor, and these were the officers that day, which was Tuesday morning by the time it happened. So if you're looking from like Thursday to Tuesday, with Sunday and Monday being some heavy periods of time, but when the officer caught her doing it, said, "Hey, why are you doing that? I saw you do that." And she said, "I want to see if the demon would do anything." And so then they said, "Oh, well, you made the cat talk too." She, "Oh yeah, I can make the cat talk." "Oh, and you did all this stuff, didn't you?" And so then that honest, the officer trying to make sense, again, first time walking in the house, trying to make sense of the situation, calls in. Imagine on the other hand, the guy who gets the call is the guy who's got to close his case up, and he's looking for a way to close the case up, and now he hears this. This is the way we're going to, so we'll pin it on the child, So the whole thing kind of evolved. It wasn't like a soup plan. It really kind of evolved. The way out, the scapegoat fell on the police department's lap when the officer called in. So again, it was a combination of things, but that's how it went down.
Before I get to, I want to hear a zombie story really bad. But before we get to that, I want to, Paul, could you tell us, the listeners, how they could listen to your radio show?
Sure. It's on Boston Providence Market, WOON 1240, or AM, or you could listen on onworldwide.com, or you could. There's a very good app called Simple Radio app by Streema, Streema, and you just do a search on WOON 1240. It's on noon to 1 p.m. every Sunday Eastern Time, and or the easy way is to go to behindtheparanormal.com, our show website, and there are almost 700 hours of free recorded shows and podcasts on that site. So if you got the time, knock yourself out.
And I also see here you're going to be a guest on Coast to Coast with your son, Ben.
Yes, that'll be about the new book, and that's going to be the 27th on the West Coast. I guess the wee hours of the 28th in our neck of the woods here with George Knapp, who's the Sunday night host, and we'll be talking about our new book, Behind the Paranormal, Everything You Know Is Wrong. Ben, by the way, is the youngest featured guest they ever had on that show. In 2010, he was 18 years old.
So we'll look forward to that.
I inspired the tagline for the book.
What's the tagline?
Everything you know is wrong.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
so I want to talk about the book too.
That joke until it's funny.
I want to hear the zombie story.
Oh, okay. Actually, that is in the book. It's called Encounter with a Loa, L-O-A. And I was in Haiti in 1984, and it was very interesting, that trip. I was in the Coast Guard, and I was able to, when I had liberty from the ship, the whole everybody on the ship even the captain kind of knew I was into this, and they kind of looked the other way. I happened to have been introduced by mail to a voodoo priest in Haiti, and Haiti is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. It's tear your heart out. So I went inland with him, and I was told by other people that I should have been very complimented because they usually don't talk to outsiders, and so I went to a Loa ceremony, and it was a place where the local voodoo temple was used for a voodoo temple. And I was surprised by some of the Christian symbols that were involved and some others. And there were people having a Loa possession thing. Was the part of this ceremony that they would be possessed by these entities. And the first thing I realized was that I felt exactly what I felt in that Bridgeport house. There was a certain sterility to the presence of these things. And the best term I could use for what I encountered in the Bridgeport house and what I encountered in that Loa ceremony it was alien. They were alien. I don't mean from other planets necessarily, but maybe a new term for maybe a new depth to the word, but something utterly non-human, hungry, and hostile. And some of these people were doing all kinds of bizarre contortions. I think I've seen a lot of weird stuff in 46 years of doing this, but this had to be some of the weirdest. And one of the men who was possessed came out and started shouting the day of his own death, when that would be. And I talked to him later. He remembered some of this. Sometimes they didn't remember this. I talked to him later, and I said, that was the most horrifying thing. He said, what are you talking about? That wasn't not now. I know when I'm going to die, I can prepare my family, and I can prepare myself. So I suppose, talk about a positive thinker. I mean,
right?
But that was just. Now I didn't see any zombies, but he did explain to me what the zombie thing is. And I wish I had my notes in front of me because I didn't think you were going to ask this, but there was a drug, and it's at the tip of my tongue, but I can't quite put my finger on it, that is given by a voodoo priest. And now it's illegal to do this. But that doesn't seem to mean much in Haiti. And a person would appear to die. They go into a catatonic state. And now they can tell pretty much if you're dead, especially if they embalm you, because you're fried. If you're not dead before they start, you are when they finish. And they would bury you, but the voodoo priest would come, and he would get you out of the grave before you would suffocate, which they kind of knew how to do that. And then this person would be in a very, they're not totally catatonic, they're in a suggestible state. A lot of things can be done. They would work for you, and it's not too different from the legends, according to this voodoo priest who told me this stuff. He said it was rare. This is in 1984. He said it was rare at the time that they were, because the government the Duvaliers, the dictators, father and son, one succeeded the other. Put really the clamps on this because they said it wasn't. It was just illegal. So in any case, that's my that's the closest I got to the zombies. But this guy, I came to know him pretty well, and he didn't have he believed at least what he was saying. So there was the zombies and the Loas in Haiti. Not a pleasant experience.
Oh.
Did he die when he said he was going to die?
Yeah.
I don't know. I didn't stay in touch. It was several years in the future, but presumably, he was no spring chicken then. So
You didn't become
Right.
Facebook friends with the zombie priest.
no, not that I know, because you never know.
If he
There's
doesn't
some
die
strange
when he
Facebook
says he's
friends.
going to, then we got to go kill him. That's the rule.
And we're going to hear about the case of the children under the stairs.
Okay. Well, by the end of the 1970s, I was completely confusticated, as Bilbo Baggins would say, when it came to the paranormal, because I had studied in the seminary. I had a theological approach, didn't hold up. The old spiritualist approach from the 19th century didn't seem to be holding up. And so I had encountered a ghost case in Maine where the ghost was alive and a student at the University of Connecticut, et cetera, et cetera. So by 1979, I was traveling a lot, and I found myself in Ottawa, Canada, capital of Canada, and I had a very good friend and associate there who was an officer in the Canadian Army. And he knew about my proclivities in this direction, and he put me in touch with some local relatives of his who had confided in him about a really, really strange thing that had happened. I went to their home, which was a brand new home in a new subdivision outside the city, and it was an ordinary house. It didn't seem to be anything particularly odd. They had they were a couple with a 10-year-old son. When I first sat down with them at their kitchen table, the son was in school, but the son is the one who had the experience. And I heard that on a Saturday morning the previous month, the boy's name was Alex. He'd gone down to the basement to get something out of the basement. Again, brand new house, and the parents were both very nervous when they were talking to me. And the boy ran back up the stairs, and he was shouting for his parents to come down to, quote, see the kids, unquote. And he looked terrified. Now, they admitted that this Alex had a real imagination, but they decided they'd go down with him and see. And they saw two children underneath the stairs on the of the basement, and the father inspected the windows to see if they'd come in. And the really funny thing is that they were a boy and a girl. They were huddled in this corner under the stairs there, and the boy looked about 8. The girl seemed to be a few years younger. They had their arms around each other, but the whole scene was abnormal, the father said. And I have my notes here. This is a quote from him. There was this eerie kind of darkness surrounding them, and both kids kind of shimmered a little. My God, it was unbelievable, unquote. And then he goes on, both had short, dark hair, and they were dressed very strangely. Both had on what looked like dark blue one-piece jumpsuits, like something you'd go jogging or skydiving in, unquote. And then the mother said, quote, they looked frightened, and at first they didn't seem to see us, unquote. And I remember when she was telling me that, she was shaking. So you get that, like, these otherworldly children, and then suddenly they seemed to notice the three people from the house standing there looking at them. They hadn't seemed to see them before. And here's another quote. They looked terrified, and the girl started to cry. But the weirdest thing about it was that we couldn't hear a thing. By this time, Alex was clinging to me and shaking. This is the mother talking. So I asked about the temperature and the general feeling in the room, and it was just, they said their skin was crawling. That's really about what it was. But then, without warning, the scene changed, according to these people. Here's another quote from the father. It was like a flash of black, then everything was back to normal. The two kids were gone, just like that, unquote. And you often hear that during these paranormal experiences. All of a sudden, it's like bingo, there it is, and then there's like almost like an old slide projector. There's like a flash of black sometime, and then it's gone. Everything's back to normal. And to me, this is an experience of parallel realities. I don't believe these are ghosts in any classic sense. I can see why people would think that, because what else would they be?
Right.
I think like me, with that alleged spirit in that house having a physical contact. I mean, these are physical beings from a parallel reality, in my opinion. That's what I was so confused about. Nothing made sense until I started to use that theory. So that's in short the story of the children under the stairs.
Well, Jennifer, I was just telling you today when I get older, you think differently, and I was saying, like, if a loaf of bread on your counter flies across the room, now we immediately jump to it's a dead person that did it, when there could be so many other explanations that we don't know about.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. We always want to.
Yeah, there we are.
Well,
Okay.
we're always trying to make sense of things. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And before we get, if we have time, we want to get to an invisible friend in Clearwater, Florida. But guys, I want Bill, you have a book, Haunted House Diaries. It's been out for a while, and Paul, you have a new book coming out with your son Ben. Can you tell us a little bit about your books?
Yours came out first, Bill.
Oh, well, the Haunted House Diaries, that's actually, Paul introduced me to that case, and it's based on a 50-year diary in this house, which really is, for lack of a better term, at the center of the paranormal flap area. And so the book's about our investigation. It's about the diary. Some different theories, so it's got different things in it, and I really want to pass it on to Paul so he can promote his new book that I'm even more looking forward to reading. What I've heard about these children under the stairs and stuff. So.
It's called.
You can website. Now let's hear from Paul about the new one.
Okay, well, thank you, Bill. It's called Behind the Paranormal, Everything You Know Is Wrong, from Schiffer Publishing, Paul Eno and Ben Eno, and it's a very nice foreword by Stanton Friedman, the grandfather of ufology. And what it really is it's radio scripts based on when we didn't have guests, things that we were doing and cases that we investigated personally and very often experienced personally. And it should be in bookstores any day now. It's people are already getting it from Amazon, and so Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble has it by internet order, but it should be in stores all over the place any day now. So, Behind the Paranormal, Everything You Know Is Wrong. Also wanted to point out, again, our website, behindtheparanormal.com. You got all kinds of free recorded shows from WOON, and 4.5-year run we had on CBS Radio as well. And we also have a new YouTube channel, pretty much brand new, and that's Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, and the case files. We're going through cases, and you can check that out. There's a lot going on.
Very exciting. Lots of good stuff.
If anybody lives in Rhode Island, if I may, the prestigious Cumberland Public Library will be the scene on December 1st of our book launch. That's an appropriate place because it's really big. It's a former monastery and is reputedly haunted. So if you happen to be in the area at 6 o'clock, Cumberland, Rhode Island, love to have you. And we'll be doing a lot of events, but they brought the book out 2 months early, so we're scrambling right now.
And
that's so cool.
Your channel on YouTube,
Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, same title as the radio show.
Okay.
And that's new video about every 2 weeks.
Cool.
That's awesome.
And I have written down Invisible Friend in Clearwater, Florida. What's that about?
Well, essentially, I was down there speaking at a conference at that gigantic wooden hotel, the Bellevue Biltmore. I don't know if it's still called that, but it was. I think it's the one of the largest occupied wooden buildings in the country. That sort of thing. It's supposed to be haunted like everything else. And one of the staff came up to me and said, I'm really worried about my nephew. Obviously, you're into this stuff because that's what you're talking about. And I went to see the nephew outside Clearwater, and a young boy, 9 years old, I believe, if I remember correctly. And he was, I expected, with the invisible friend thing, you expect somebody like Marcy, extremely introverted and reluctant to talk to strangers. But this kid was a real extrovert. He was into baseball. He was interested in because by profession I'm a journalist, and he was very interested in becoming a reporter. Asked me about that. So finally we get around to the subject of this invisible friend. And he said, oh yeah, and it had the same name as he did, and he said he was born. So he gave me a date that was exactly 100 years after the date of his birth. Okay, and he was like this counterpart. Now, I didn't quite know what to make of this until I felt the so-called invisible friend arrive in the room. Now, I don't know whether it's because I've done this so long or whether you just, I'm not doing the medium thing. You feel the presence of a person. It's one of our survival instincts. There was a young boy in that room, along with the one I was talking to, okay? Long story short, because I know we're running out of time, this boy lived in what really could be called an alternate reality if what he said was true and if the impressions I got were true and if what the young boy said was true. It was in North America. It was Florida, but it was very different Florida. It's far more rural. And Florida is a cattle state. A lot of people don't realize that. But it was very cattle state in this boy's world. He lived in this benign empire, which I didn't quite catch the name of, that ran all the way down the east coast of North America from Labrador all the way to Florida. You couldn't make this stuff up if you tried. And it was the world that he lived in seemed to be a little bit more peaceful. But the boy claimed that this friend had saved his life on several occasions. And I almost got the impression that this boy was a direct descendant of this young fellow in our Florida. Okay. And I only got to spend one day there, but this is the information I got. There was somebody who he was an invisible friend, I suppose you could say, but I didn't feel any kind of parasite. I didn't feel anything that was dishonest here. I just felt the presence of a very nice young man from 100 years in the future, if you want to say that, or more. And that's just all I know is, I was a reporter at one time. All I can do is report it. I make no claims that these things are true, but this is what happened, and this is what I feel. So you tell me.
I don't know. We have 10 minutes left. I want to hear a little. You're a speaker at a lot of UFO conferences and stuff.
Yeah, we're not invited to speak. Ben and I are not invited to speak at a lot of paranormal conferences because we're not good for business. A lot of people make their living at this stuff, and they make their living based on 19th century theories, and we question all that. So we're far more popular among the UFO community than we are among the ghost hunting, quote unquote, community. So although I did write the foreword for John Zaffis and Rosemary Ellen Guiley's new book, which I'm good friends with them, but we agree on two things: we're good friends, and it's Friday. So, but we have a lot of respect for each other because we could be, Ben and I could be wrong. I mean, maybe they're right. I mean, you have to keep open mind.
That's right, open mind.
Open mind. Maybe all you guys are wrong and I'm wrong. How's that?
Yeah, well, Bill and I are often on the same docket at a lot of these conferences, and we have just a wonderful time. They're great people, and we have sort of the barbershop quartet of the paranormal. We have Shane Searway, somebody you want to have on your show, Ben and myself and Bill, and maybe a quintet too, because we have Mark D'Antonio from MUFON, who is one of the most brilliant minds I've ever encountered. And the five of us are great friends. And we got our hands on a couple of very interesting pies right now. We'll see what happens.
And I was talking earlier about what would you say the top 3 or 4 UFO incidents were in UFO history?
Well, if you're asking me, I think certainly, obviously Roswell, and Stan Friedman can talk about that. Rendlesham, that's one of the pies Ben and I have our hands in, because the Rendlesham Forest in England, of course, was the December 1980. This is the public face of this. Was the encounter by a number of U.S. Air Force personnel at the twin NATO bases that straddled this very weird forest. UFO sightings, supposedly landings, and all sorts of bizarre experiences. I think particularly of Jim Peniston, who wrote down a number of strange insignia or letters on the side of one of these craft and actually touched it, and says that he received a binary code download that were geographical coordinates, this sort of thing. There is opinion these were time travelers or aliens or both or whatever. But Ben and I believe that these things are all pretty much tips of the iceberg, and that's the idea of the paranormal flap that Bill referred to earlier. We started to talk to a lot of local people in that vicinity of Suffolk, England, and sure enough, people are still having similar experiences, including binary code downloads. This has been going on since Saxon times, from the way back in the history of England. And we looked at the history of this, and when we spoke over there in the village of Woodbridge, we had standing room only because it was not that big of a room, and everybody had their own stories of things that had happened to them in Rendlesham Forest. If you look at the history, paranormal history, you had the Green Children of Woolpit place 20 miles, and we find that these flap areas can cover hundreds of square miles.
Just talking about them.
Yeah.
The Green Children.
Really?
We were just talking about that today.
That was right near Rendlesham Forest.
Did not know that.
The Aldeburgh Sky Battle in 1642 was only 13 miles away. Disappearing cyclists, big cat sightings, black dogs, poltergeist activity, Bigfoot, or as they call it, Yeti. When we were there, this is another story, but Ben he doesn't like me talking about this, but he tends to go into trances and collapse, and all these things happen. We were there at night with Larry Warren, who was one of the witnesses to the 1980 Air Force incidents, and we were there. This is in 2012, and we were there with a number of local listeners to our show, and a group of us was in the parking lot. Ben didn't get out of the parking lot before he collapsed, and I said, I've seen this before. Maybe it's a shaman thing. So I said, don't touch him, you'll get nauseous. And all these dogs started to howl up and down the road, including the dog that was with us. Several minutes later, he came out of it, and he had these impressions of this. So we made it to the East Gate, and we felt as though something was following us. Some of the pictures that were taken that night, you wouldn't believe. So it's still an active place, and the tip of the iceberg was in December 1980. That's what everybody knows about. But this place is one of the wildest in the world, paranormally speaking. So
it's still going on.
Still going on, yeah. Still going on.
So a lot of people haven't heard of that one. I went on a YouTube marathon, and I couldn't get enough of it.
Yeah.
If anybody wants to check that out, Rendlesham Incident. I guess
the Rendlesham UFO incident. All kinds of stuff on TV about this, documentaries, History Channel. It's all, but they don't talk about any of the rest of this.
And we have 4 minutes left. Do you know the Phoenix Lights is another big one? Yeah,
I've seen them from an airplane.
Oh, tell me about that.
Well, Ben and I were on our way to San Diego because the Phoenix Lights started in the 80s, and it was literally this string of lights appearing over Phoenix, Arizona, which is not a small town. It's a state capital. And the military claimed later on that they were just flares dropped from a plane. Now, I spent 12 years in the military, man and boy, albeit in the reserve. I did an awful lot of active duty. We were doing a lot of strange stuff. I know what a flare looks like, and it's not what I saw. Now, this is in, I believe it was 06 or 07. Ben and I were on our way to San Diego, and he was asleep like everybody else on the other side of the plane, but we were passing over Phoenix, and sure enough, there was a string of lights. And and it's very difficult to tell from a plane, especially at night, precisely what altitude things are. When we were at 33, they had to be 10, I would estimate. They were not one craft. They broke up. One appeared to be heading for the ground almost to land, but of course we're zipping by at 200, 300, 400 miles an hour here. But I did get a really good look at it, and I don't think anybody else in the plane saw it. I'd love to have been in the cabin at the time, see what the pilots were saying. So we got to San Diego the next day, and sure enough, in the newspaper, it reported that they had seen the Phoenix Lights the previous night. So I know that they're not. I didn't see any flares that night. There is, of course, a lot of military activity in the Southwest. Some of it could have been flares, but what I saw was in no way were they flares. They were disc-shaped for sure.
We have a couple minutes left. I want to know your guys' theory. Do you think we're going to have the Independence Day incidents in our lifetime that they're going to come down and communicate? Well,
I kind of agree. I don't know. Bill will have his opinion too, but I kind of agree with Stan Friedman, who says more or less of a quote: "We're a primitive species whose primary activity is tribal warfare. Why would they want to talk to us?" I don't know, Bill.
Well, you know what? I
Yeah,
was
yeah, I
saying,
do.
what do you think, Bill?
No, no, I don't think. I don't know if it'll ever happen. I mean, it's been so long. I don't know. It's been disappointing to me because I'm big into this stuff, and when you look at what we've learned about UFOs and this phenomena in 40, 50 years, it's basically nothing. And I don't
Well,
know.
that may be because we're looking in the
It
wrong
appears,
place. I'm sorry to interrupt, Bill, but just to get this in the last minute,
yeah,
they may not be craft from other planets. They may be parasitical entities from parallel worlds, which is why Ben and I are being deluged by UFO researchers who are running into poltergeist activity when people have had so-called abduction experiences. Maybe the whole phenomenon is just the label we put on it. It depends on the context. So we may be looking at a whole new way to look at the UFO phenomena and what it may mean.
Agreed.
yeah, and
Interesting.
I don't disagree with that, but I think it's one of the reasons we probably won't see this kind of Independence Day scenario.
Well, I certainly hope not.
But I could be,
I don't.
yeah, right. But I could be wrong. Or like a lot of the top scientists says, do we? Who is it? Stephen Hawking, I think, said, we really shouldn't be looking for them or want to find them because if they are advanced, if there is out there on other planets aside from the multiverse kind of thing, but if there is life on other planet, if it's intelligent and if it's advanced, it's going to have all the same problems and issues that we have. And Stephen Hawking says, we shouldn't be looking, and so that's another way to look at it. We're fascinated by
Yeah.
it. We're fascinated by it, but he's saying they're going to need resources, and life's going to be pretty much the same as far as the resources that are going to be needed, and maybe they fight too, and nothing good's going to come of it. Which probably is true when you consider we have trouble enough getting along with each other.
Well, thank you again, Bill and Paul, for joining us. We'll have you on again in the near future. Good luck on your
Because,
book, and thanks for coming on tonight.
yeah, you
Thank you.
guys were awesome.
Thank you. Thank you
Good
very
night,
much.
fellas. Have a happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Thanks for
Happy
listening.
Thanksgiving. Bye, guys.
Good night.